Hello and welcome to our webinar, How You Say It, Making Matters Worse or Better by How You Communicate. I'm Mike Bias with the Alzheimer's Association, and before I introduce your speaker, I just want to let you know if you're logging in live, down at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A pod. Now, that's where you can type in any questions or comments that you may have for our speaker, and we'll get to those toward the end of our hour together. The notes from today's presentation can be downloaded at alzwebinars.org. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, who you can see just below me. Elizabeth Rodas is a PhD who engages in research aimed at improving lives of older adults with neurodegenerative disorders, and that's at the Sanders Brown Center on Aging at the University of Kentucky. She's joining us today from Lexington, Kentucky. Now, the Sanders Brown Center is a nationally recognized National Institute of Health Center of Excellence for research specific to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Elizabeth holds a PhD in gerontology and is also an occupational therapist with a specialization in dementia care and also care provider training. Elizabeth has developed a line of research related to behavioral management in dementia care, sensory-based assessment and intervention, and environmental aspects related to behaviors associated with dementia. All that to say is she's bringing her immense skills and knowledge to bear on helping improve the quality of life for people with dementia. Welcome, Elizabeth. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you take away the presentation, and I'll be back at the end to talk about the resources that the Alzheimer's Association has.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to be here today and to present some of the experiences and some of the current research that we have going on at the University of Kentucky and nationwide, and some of the opportunities that we have to enhance communication more so than just by words and talking from person to person. A couple of the objectives that we have today. I always like to start presentations with a brief definition of dementia. I want to show you what the brain kind of looks like when it does have some of the most common dementia types. And then I want to talk to you about communication through a sensory-based approach. How can we use the specific sensations to communicate better as recognition of verbal communication can go down with advanced dementia? When we talk about sensory stimulation and sensation, we always have to place that within an environment. So I'm going to talk about the surrounding environments as well. I'm going to end with some concluding comments on how you can take these concepts and employ them from a care partner or caregiver role. And I really like to end presentations with a highlight or a high note of quality of life as really our focus at this point in the life trajectory and conditions. So just to start, we often, everyone might know this might be common hat for everybody, but dementia is really an umbrella term, and it includes conditions that change functioning in a vast area of really anything that the brain controls. So memory, judgment, language, complex motor or movements, intellectual functioning like thinking and problem solving. All of these different concepts can happen under the umbrella of dementia. And when we say dementia, that's just one term or a condition. Dementia isn't a disease, it's just a term. So when we talk about the diseases of dementia, we get more specific, like Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal lobe dementia. There's lots of different types of disease or dementias that will contribute to these overall global changes in function. So when we're talking about function and behavior and communication and things like that, we have to think about a healthy brain. So a brain, assuming that all of us are healthy today, what do our brains look like? We have different lobes and different sections that process different parts of our environment and different aspects of our body and what's going on. A lot of times our frontal lobe, or the area in the front, is things that are going to control your thinking and your problem solving. The higher complex functions of cognition happen in the frontal part of the brain. And then we can move throughout the brain and looking at movement and sensory processing, and not only sensory processing, but our perceptions of what we're sensing. So sensation is the actual physical input coming into our body, but then it's our brain's job to perceive that. Is it something you like, something you don't like, or do you have feelings about it at all? The back part of your brain in the occipital lobe has a lot to do with vision and balance. And then we have the temporal lobe that has a lot to do with language and memory. So when we're talking about direct verbal communication, we're talking a lot about the temporal lobe. But today I want to offer some different ways of thinking about this brain and communication that's going to be encompassing all areas and all different lobes, because maybe in certain dementia types, your temporal lobe or this language communication area might have a disease. So let me show you a little bit of about what a diseased brain looks like. If we look at this top, I've been told that it looks like a cauliflower, but if you're looking at the left side, we have a healthy brain. So it's nice and plump and juicy. If you look at the right side of this brain, this is advanced Alzheimer's disease. So this has a global shrinkage. The cells actually die, and then they get cleaned out like waste. So if you think about a wet sponge and you just squeeze it, and it condenses or collapses on itself, think about the brain that way and that it never bounces back. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. If we're thinking about this healthy, functioning brain and what all of these parts of the brain do and what areas they control, we're going to see global effects in function and communication and behavior changes throughout the entire brain in Alzheimer's disease. The second most common type of dementia is vascular dementia. Vascular dementia is different than Alzheimer's because it's more of a pinpoint focus and change over time. A lot of times we could consider this a stepwise decline in function, meaning that people will be doing okay and then they'll have a vascular event like a TIA or transchemic episode that changes function, or a mini stroke is a lot of times what people will call a TIA. And then they'll have a decline in function, and then they'll do okay again, and then they'll have another episode and a decline in function. So if we're looking at the normal brain on top here, we can see that after a vascular event, the tissue in that area actually dies off. So there's just voids of where the brain tissue used to be, and now it doesn't work anymore. So whatever that part of the brain actually controlled, it's not there anymore. So it's either up to the brain's other areas to pick back up, or that function is going to dramatically change or be lost. Lewy body dementia is the third most common, and this is actually a condition that we can't naturally or easily diagnose through imaging until autopsy. So if you see this little blob right here, this is a Lewy body. It's a cluster of protein. And when it's deposited in the brain, it actually kills the tissue, the brain tissue of whatever is within that blob. So a lot of times I think about Lewy bodies if you're driving down the interstate and then there's a giant sinkhole right in the way. You're either going to have to drive around it. That's what the neural messages are going to have to do around that Lewy body. So if it's going this way, here's our sinkhole. We're either going to stop and not go anywhere, or we're going to go around it. So that's some of the behaviors or some of the physical mechanisms of Lewy bodies and communication throughout the brain. We have a message, it's going across, and then it just stops. And I'm going to give you a couple more examples of what that kind of looks like as we move forward. The fourth type of dementia, the most common type of dementia, is frontotemporal lobe dementia. And it's interesting, I don't know if you all know a lot about autism, but autism has some really specific behaviors, like repetitive behaviors, nonverbal, and decreasing eye contact. There's several other different behaviors. But frontotemporal lobe dementia has been called a copycat of autism behaviors, which is interesting. So there's not a whole lot of research to back that up, but some of the interventions and some of the ways to communicate that I'm going to talk about today are using this concept of communication through a sensory standpoint that can also be used across the lifespan in pediatric conditions such as autism. But in frontotemporal lobe dementia, we see a general atrophy in the frontal lobe, so that's thinking and things like that, and in the temporal lobe, and we talked about how that has to do with memory and language and understanding. So as we talk about our conditions and ways to communicate today, I really want you guys to think about these images And what does the brain of your loved one or the person that you're working with really look like? Is it this healthy, nice, plump brain and we should expect them to function and communicate just like you or I? Or do we need to be a little bit more empathetic and understanding because their brain has kind of been squeezed like a sponge and it's not bouncing back? So how can we best effectively communicate with them? So just to kind of conclude on my definition of dementia, it affects things globally. Anything that the brain controls, dementia can affect. So it's important that we understand that from a communication standpoint, in that it's not just talking back and forth, but it's everything that we do is what the dementia is going to impact. So we need to really use resources outside of just verbal communication back and forth. I'm going to tell you about a patient. I've had lots of patients, so I have lots of different stories, but I really like Rose. When I met Rose, I came into a locked dementia unit in a personal care facility. She was an 82-year-old female. She was frail and about 90 pounds. I was thinking, well, I'll hold that off what I was thinking, but when I first met her, she was hallucinating and standing in the corner kind of talking, mumbling to herself. She was nonverbal, so she wasn't really talking. The things that she said were mumbles and weren't really functional communication. She spent most of the day staring at the walls and standing in the corner. When I kind of embraced her or helped her walk away from the corner, she was rigid and had difficulty with coordination. Some of the concerns and reasons for an occupational therapy referral, a lot of these examples will be through an occupational therapist standpoint, and I can talk more about that at the end if you all have questions about that. But Rose was not using the bathroom effectively. She was actually defecating on the floor during the meal time in the dining room, and so that wasn't really a good option for the rest of the residents or for Rose. What I found out was that it was taking 4 to 5 staff members to take Rose to the toilet. This 90-pound little lady, they took 5 people to get her to hold her down so that they could change her soiled brief and have her actually use a toilet or clean her up after going to the bathroom. And it wasn't just the toilet, but it was the shower as well. She would fight, she would kick, she would scream. She was not communicating what she felt she needed, and the staff were not communicating in a way that she could understand and recognize, and so she fought. I want you to continue to kind of think about Rose and her situation, and we're going to talk about her throughout my presentation. And I'll kind of show you how we best communicated with Rose through a sensory standpoint. So when I say sensory, what does that really mean? A multisensory approach is best used when communicating with people with dementia. When I'm talking, you can hear me talk right now. You can verbally understand my words. That is one way of communication. You can also see my face, so you can recognize my facial expressions. You can recognize the tone of my voice and the inflection in my voice and kind of match that with my facial expressions to kind of get a feeling of what I'm trying to communicate. So we're adding sight and sound. What I like to use when I'm working with people with communication or with dementia who may have some communication troubles or difficulties is methods beyond just those two. What I have found is that a lot of times people will tend to look down, and so making eye contact and looking at my face doesn't readily happen. And verbal communication may or may not be fully heard because people have decreased hearing as they age naturally, and then dementia can further change the hearing mechanisms within the brain. So I like to add in a couple other mechanisms. So sight, sound. I like smells, to use smell as a way to communicate as well. Taste, touch. I love to hold a hand. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in just a second. Pressure, we call this proprioceptive input. So anytime you're sitting in a chair and what your body feels like as the gravity is holding you down to that chair, that's a proprioceptive input. Movement is the 7th sensation, and technically we call this vestibular stimulation. So this is any kind of movement that you have. We'll just call it movement for today, but I want you guys to be familiar with the word vestibular input just in case you hear it again. So I want to break down each one of these sensations and give you some tips on how to communicate with people with dementia. When we're thinking about adding sight in as a way of communication, there's several different things that it's important that you recognize. First, naturally, as you age, your eyes and your acuity with your vision changes. So if you're working with your loved one or your care partner and they need glasses, it's important that we're encouraging them to wear glasses as much as possible. I've worked with lots of different patients across the continuum of care environments, from home to nursing homes to personal care facilities, and they say, well, she hides her glasses, so we don't let her wear them. Or she hides her hearing aids, and so we keep them locked up. That doesn't really help us from a communication standpoint. So if someone has sensory aids like glasses or hearing aids, make sure that we use those and put those in place. Another couple things that happen, sensory or color awareness changes. So you have decreased awareness to contrast in different colors. But bright reds and greens have actually been shown to really stand out when someone has advanced dementia. So in my tool bag, I keep a roll of red duct tape and lime green duct tape. And I'll use those anytime I'm working with someone maybe in the bathroom and they have rails on their toilet, but their caregiver is telling me that they're having a hard time telling them where to sit because the person can't find the handrails on the toilet. So let's use color as a way of communication. I'll wrap red duct tape around the handrails on the toilet or a walker or whatever I need to draw their attention to. So now I'm using color as a way to communicate where I want this person to put their hands. And that has had good success in my practice for sure. Another thing that happens is that as people age, they tend to look down. So they're looking towards the floor. And as their dementia progresses, they actually forget that they need to look up. So a lot of times with advanced dementia, people will have a tendency to only see in their environment 24 to 48 inches off of the floor. So when I'm communicating with someone, usually for the first time, or even if it's on the 10th time, I usually try to get within that window. If I walk up to someone and I'm expecting them to make eye contact with me, that's probably not going to happen with this population. So I offer my hand. You can't see my hand, but I kind of offer my hand with an open hand like this within that 24 to 48 inch window as I get closer to them so that they can see the palm of my hand and use that as a visual cue that, oh, there's a hand that's probably attached to a person, and then they follow my body and naturally look up to my face and we make eye contact. So I want you guys to continue to think about that as you walk up to someone that you're working with or that you live with and you're taking care of. When you pop within their world without recognizing or appreciating this window that they have for vision, then we might startle them and knock them off of their feet just by that startle because they're not aware that we're coming because maybe the verbal communication might not be working as well. Another thing that happens is that the visual peripherals continue to decrease and narrow. So we're looking at the floor and we also have a narrow window on our sides. So by offering that hand down low, you're really putting your hand right in their visual window, and that's going to set the stage for a more positive tone in communication. As color awareness changes, dark areas begin to look like holes. So people lose depth perception and they lose contrast with dark areas and shaded areas. I had a patient and we were working on getting to the dining room and working on walking down the hall. And every time the color changed on the carpet it was a block style carpet from light to dark, each time we changed to the dark color, he would pick up his walker and literally try to jump into the dark area on the floor because he thought it was going down. Kind of like into a pool of water, he thought he was going down into a hole. So when we're using colors and sight as a way of communication, making sure that we're able as caregivers to assess the environment in a way that we can help navigate someone to function or to get where they need to through various different methods. If we're solely relying on vision and then this person thinks that they're walking into a hole, they might need a little bit of tactile or touch input to help them get around that if the auditory and language perception isn't working very well. Another thing that I like to use a lot as verbal perception goes down are pictures. So I don't know if you all have ever heard of a picture or storyboard, but I've used this with a decent amount of success in using a picture of a toilet. So we say we need to go to the bathroom. So I'm saying bathroom, I'm saying toilet, and I'm showing someone a picture, and then they're more likely to recognize what I'm trying to communicate by giving them different pictures of what tasks that we need to complete or what's coming up next. The next sensation I want to talk about is sound. This is something personally that I have to really change my tone and change my thinking when I work with patients with dementia. It's been shown or it's been said that it can take up to 90 seconds for a person with dementia to process what they hear. 90 seconds is a very long time. So if I walk up to Bob and I say, "Hi, Bob, my name's Elizabeth," and then I expect him to look at me and say, "Hi, my name's Bob," he might not talk back. And then so I say it again, "Hey, Bob, my name's Elizabeth. How are you doing today?" And he might still not even look at me. And so on that third time, I'm going to probably start to get close and assume, one, that he's either ignoring me, or two, that he can't hear me. So I'm going to raise my voice and talk louder and get into his personal space. But by the time I do that, it's probably getting close to the time that he's perceiving that first time that I said, "Hi, my name's Elizabeth." And so he's starting to look up. And by then, I'm yelling at him and I'm in his personal space. So he's going to get defensive and he's going to kind of get agitated and say, "Who are you and why are you in my personal space?" So if I'm using language and verbal communication as my only way of communicating and I'm not recognizing this delay in processing, I'm degrading or really hindering my opportunity for a positive communication that way. So I really want you guys to think about the need to slow down when you're talking and in between commands or suggestions, phrases. So instead of saying, "Hey, my name's Elizabeth," I would say, "Hi, it's nice to see you. My name is Elizabeth." So in between that, I'm giving pauses, I'm talking a little bit slower, and then I would just kind of wait and see if he's going to respond. And in talking to caregivers, I've had caregivers say that they've waited up to 30 seconds, and then the person that they're working with will just naturally smile and stand up, and they're ready to go because we're allowing them time to process what they hear. Another thing that can happen is that because we're having so much information coming in and this stream of communication verbally, people may only pick up 1 out of every 3 words that they hear. So if you think about it, I've practiced this before, but I'm not going to try to do it today. But if you think about only hearing every 1 out of 3 words that's said to you, that's not going to make a lot of sense. You're probably going to be frustrated because you can't understand what's going on or what's being said. And so you're going to be defensive and you might stop listening, stop trying to kind of engage, or you might just walk away. And from a communication standpoint as a caregiver, that's the last thing that we want to happen. So again, slow down, put pauses in between your words. A couple other ways that we can use sounds as a way of communication and helping people kind of function better is with music. Music highlights lots of different areas throughout your brain, and it can become calming or kind of alerting. So when you're using music, I want you to think about the golden years as the rule of thumb for music. The music that the person listened to from the ages of 15 to 25 is the music that they're going to listen to for the rest of their lives. So we have golden oldies, and people that are in their 80s and 90s might like Frank Sinatra, whereas people in their late 50s and 60s might like Elvis. But the people that are in their 90s today are probably not going to respond the same way if you put Elvis on as if you were to put something on that was played more during that age, during that time period. Same goes when I'm 70 or 80. I'm not going to like Elvis. The music that I liked during my 15 to 25 years is much different than what's being played. So if we're using music in a way to communicate, be appreciative of those golden years. Nature sounds are also really calming and soothing. So if you're trying to communicate that it's time for bedtime, I've talked to people where they put crickets on, like on their phone, because crickets is a natural way to communicate. Oh, well, it's time to go to bed when the crickets start chirping. Or in the morning, putting on some roosters, because roosters crowing is kind of a key sign that it's time to wake up. And I live in Kentucky, and so there's lots of people who are in work in the farms and things like that, and those are natural sounds in the rural areas in Kentucky. So those are a couple ways to use sight and sound in terms of communicating. Smell and taste I put together because if you can't smell, you can't necessarily taste. I will say that perception is different than sensation. So sensation is a chemical reaction that happens within your brain. Perception is how you feel based on that chemical reaction. We're finding now that behaviors and communication can actually still change even if you don't have perception. So I know I've had questions saying, well, people with Alzheimer's disease can't perceive smell, but that doesn't mean that they can't still benefit from the sensation of smells. So I want you guys to continue to think about that. And just so that you guys are aware and that you know, lavender is calming and a citrus smell is alerting. Aveeno lotion has a nice line of lotion, and I was doing this 10 years ago. There's a whole lot of new aromatherapy lines and things like that. So I want you guys to kind of think about what is the smell trying to convey from a communication standpoint. And from a taste standpoint, if you're working with someone and you're trying to get them to eat more and you're trying to tell them, take more food in, eat more food, drink more water, sugar is something that people crave, or a little bit of salt. So by offering those tastes onto the food that you're offering, can communicate from a chemical standpoint saying, hey, this person needs to eat a little bit more if they're not following your verbal directions. Tactile or touch is one of my favorite perceptions or sensations that we can offer. Deep touch can be calming. So a lot of people like hugs. They like to be hugged and held. If you think about a baby and the nervous system of a baby, in utero, they're constantly surrounded by water. So they're constantly getting pressure into their joints and they're getting squeezed and touched. And once they're born, one of the ways that they connect with the environment is through touching everything and putting everything in their mouth. And then as adults, we naturally touch things and we fidget and we move around a lot. And as we grow into adulthood, our opportunities for engaging in different sensations changes. The light on my camera just stopped. Can you still see me okay?
Okay. Yeah, you've frozen. We can still hear you.
Okay. I'm not sure what's going on with the computer, but I'll keep going. So if we're thinking about touch throughout the lifespan, when we're thinking about people with dementia, they have decreased opportunity for human touch or for animal touch or exploring their environments with touch. So holding hands is a great way to communicate with somebody. It sets the stage for their nervous system to become alert and to recognize that you're there and that you want to communicate with them. With that said, if someone is very upset and they will not hold your hand and they do not want to be touched, that's a way that they are communicating to you that they're agitated or upset, and you might not want to push communication a whole lot at that point. Another thing that I like to encourage caregivers is to stand on the side instead of right directly in front of the person that you're working with or that you're trying to touch. When you stand on the side, but still within that 24 to 48 inch visual field, you're going to offer the person an opportunity to not to welcome you without being directly confrontational or right in front of them. Because when you stand directly in front of someone, that often has a tendency to feel confrontational. So there's lots of different opportunities to communicate through touch. Here's our last two sensations. We have pressure, which is proprioceptive. So I'm going to go back to that baby developing in the womb. They're constantly surrounded by fluid. So that kind of shows us that the nervous system grows and develops really well under pressure. Once that baby's born, we swaddle them up tight to help them feel calm. I'm not suggesting that you swaddle up the person that you're working with. That's probably not ethical or appropriate. But we can give them hugs and give them massage and give them a little bit of pressure into their joints because we know that it's calming to the nervous system through a little bit of pressure. I will offer a little bit of warning with this one, that as joints age, they can become very arthritic, and so too much pressure can actually be really painful. So this is a person-to-person call, and if you've seen on the market, it's kind of exploding with weighted blankets and weighted vests and things like that. You have to be careful with how much weight that you have. And one of the caveats or things that I say with pressure is that you're going to get the maximum benefit of pressure within 20 minutes. So if you have a weighted lap pad or a weighted blanket, after 20 minutes, you're not going to get any more therapeutic benefit. But the benefits of that pressure can last for 3 to 4 hours. So if I give someone a weighted blanket that's kind of fit to be the appropriate weight for their lap, and I give that to them for 20 minutes, I can see changes or calming in their nervous system that can last up to 3 to 4 hours. Vestibular or movement sensory input is the last one I'm going to talk about today. And this has to do with any way that the body is sensing movement. So it can be walking around, it can be rolling around in your wheelchair. Rocking is really calming. So if we go back to that baby, we're swaddling them up, we're rocking them, we're giving them lavender-infused lotion, and we're singing to them. We're communicating to this nervous system in this infant or this baby that doesn't have any way to communicate back from a sensory standpoint, and we're helping them feel calm and comfortable to help them grow. I'm not saying that an older person with dementia, that their brain is in that infantile state. Please don't take that away. What I'm saying is that we can use sensations to best communicate with the nervous system and the brain throughout the lifespan. So with the movement, if someone is trying to get out of their chair or they're starting to wonder, it's really important that we encourage them to do that safely. So if someone is a high fall risk, maybe we just need to spend 5 minutes with them and take them for a walk with the walker, or push them in the wheelchair, or whatever they need to do to get that movement, because they're craving it, they're needing it. So if we give the movement and vestibular input to them safely, they'll be less likely to do it in an unsafe way in a couple hours. With movement, the impacts of the movement can last 6 to 8 hours after you engage in the sensation. So if you have a swing or something like that, that's a great way to offer movement. But just remember that too much can have an impact on behavior for the next 6 to 8 hours. So that kind of wraps up my description of how we can communicate from a sensory standpoint, the sensory systems and communicating in each one of those systems. What I want us to kind of focus on for a couple minutes is the environment and how sensations are offered. So here I have an example of a physical environment. And when we talk about environments, we have to think about physical environment versus social environment. So I'm going to talk more about the physical aspect right now. But I want you to look at this picture. This is a picture of just a bleak nursing home that you could probably find in any city. This is what the halls look like, and you know, a patient's just kind of walking up and down to get her sensory input with her movement. It's not really inviting, it's not overly safe, and there's not a whole lot of sensory input options going on right here. And this is probably what the rooms look like. There's not really any pictures, there's no colors, there's minimal sunlight, especially for the person in the bed that's closest to us. If that curtain gets pulled, they don't really have any natural light. They're not really getting any natural sounds. So from a sensory standpoint, this environment is communicating to this person that they either need to go seek out their sensations or they kind of can give up. A lot of times I've seen people just kind of give up and kind of like a learned helplessness kind of phenomenon where they just stay in bed all day. So when we're communicating with someone or the person that we're working with or that we live with or that we love, when we communicate with words, that's great. But when we bring into this environment colors and sounds and music and different things to touch, we're going to ignite and really elicit a lot of neurological responses and communication approaches if this is the environment that they typically live in. And a lot of times, I've seen lots of different nursing homes that will line patients up along the hall. You know, if that's their practice, that's their practice. But there are alternatives that we can do. Can we create and add color to a hallway? We're having more and more really designed environments specific to people with dementia. So this would be an ideal hallway that looks like an actual hallway that you're going to your home. We can have rooms that are set up with our favorite recliner from home and pictures that remind us of our family that aren't overwhelmingly colorful and trying to over-elicit sensory stimulation. Excuse me, but it's enough to kind of elicit memories and make me feel comfortable. We can have living rooms and social spaces that look like living rooms. And what is this environment? What does this door communicate? The door before the change communicates to me that I'm in an institution and that I'm locked in if this door won't open when I want to go for a walk. But on the other side, this door, this wall, communicates that it looks like a bookshelf and not really anything unless I want to read today. Doesn't look like anything that I need to go pound on and bang on and be upset with. So I would then go other places. So how does our built environment communicate with our nervous system and our body to really function effectively? All right, so in the beginning, I talked a little bit about Rose, and I gave you a situation where this frail lady was taking it was taking 5 different people to get her to go to the bathroom, and she was agitated and not communicating. Based on her behaviors, it was my understanding or perception that she most likely suffered from Lewy body's dementia because she was hallucinating. She had rigid body movements, and those are both signs of Lewy body dementia. When I did walk her into the bathroom as an occupational therapist, that's something that we often do, she went from mumbling to actually saying, "Please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me." And it was at that moment that I realized that her built environment of the bathroom had become a traumatic experience, and that any kind of communication that I was going to give to her in that situation was not going to be therapeutic or effective because she was afraid. So I shut the door. I told the staff, let's not go back into the bathroom. Let's find alternative means of using the bathroom and taking a shower because this environment is now communicating to her that she's going to get hurt and she doesn't like that. It's not going to be in her benefit. I also noticed when we did go into the bathroom, there was very poor lighting. She hardly ever had on her glasses, and she was considered legally blind from a visual condition that she had. The toilet was white, the walls were white, the floor was white, and the grab bar around the toilet was white. So I told you guys that visual awareness, color perception goes down, and shadows and things like that change. So if everything is white, how is she going to know that there's a toilet that I want her to sit on? How is my environment communicating and preparing her for a toileting experience? It's probably not. So she's probably feeling that I take her into this completely white environment with 5 strangers who are trying to take off her clothes. And what I knew about Rose is that she was a very proper lady and private. And so by having 5 strangers taking off her clothes, I would probably fight too if I didn't understand what was going on. And I've talked to you guys a little bit about what happened. She would begin yelling, hitting, and pulling away anytime we would try to put her on the toilet in that bathroom. So we concluded that we just needed to shut the door in the bathroom. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of go past some of this presentation, but I do want you guys to kind of look at it and you have the notes and things like that. It's really important that we can use the environment and sensation to change the way that the brain actually looks throughout the entire lifespan and even in the presence of dementia. So using sensory stimulation, physical exercise, social activity, and cognitive activity, these can all change the brain and help the brain grow. So neuroplasticity is a term that we use a lot in the science that talks about changing the brain throughout the entire lifespan. Just a quick overview. Here's a picture of a cell, a neuron in the brain. And this picture on the left, this is before an enhanced environment. So you can see that the communication through these dendrites, they're there. That's great. But let's put someone in an enhanced environment with lots of sensory stimulation that's communicating back and forth between the environment and the person. We can see actual growth in someone who is aged with dementia. And these cells are changing and growing, offering new cell growth despite these conditions. So if I am going to be talking to you as a caregiver, I want you guys to take away from this presentation that there's lots of different avenues of communication beyond just talking to someone. So I've given you examples and ways that we can use each sensory system for communication. But I want you guys to also be an investigator. So if we're working with someone and they're trying to communicate to us that they're agitated or anxious or bored, they might not be able to verbally tell you that. They might just start pacing or yelling or hitting or walking away or rummaging through things. There's lots of different ways that people will communicate that they're uncomfortable. So I'm going to implore you guys to be investigators, to look at the personal aspects of what's going on with this person. Are they just thirsty and need some water? Maybe. Or are they overstimulated in their environment because there's 8 grandkids here today and it's just kind of loud and they can't handle it? I want you guys to think about how the person and the environment and how they occupy their time influences communication and then has a result on behavior. So we call this the person, environment, occupation model, and then that includes performance as well. So we use this model to help Rose. We specifically worked using sensations to prime her body for toileting. So in order to do that, we put lavender throughout her room because we know lavender is calming and she's already upset or agitated when it comes to going to the bathroom. We gave her a 5-pound weighted vest and put her in a rocking chair for about 10 minutes anytime prior or directly before we put her on the toilet or wanted her to go to the toilet for that change. So she had a 5-pound weighted vest, she was rocking, and in her bedroom there was lavender. She could smell lavender. She was also an a cappella singer, so she liked music. So her daughter brought in a CD of her singing, Rose singing in the background. So we put on music because people like that. And I talked to the caregivers to talk slower and use different commands that weren't so long. Instead of saying a 5-command sentence, maybe do 1 command at a time and pause in between. In the environment, we set up her environment to communicate better and prepare her for what was going to happen. So we closed the bathroom door. We're not going to use that environment anymore. It's traumatic. I put a bedside commode under a restroom sign in the corner of her room. So that now became her restroom or her area for toileting. We used lime green duct tape all over the rails and the toilet seat so that she could see where she needed to go better. Like I said, we also added lavender and music to the environment as well. In the occupation, or how we actually engaged in that activity, we moved the task out of the bathroom. We also decreased the staff. I said, 5 people is overwhelming her. It's overwhelming her neurological system, and it's communicating that people are coming after her. So she's being kind of attacked. So we only had 1 or 2 staff members to help her be more comfortable. We also used a towel warmer for the wipes to help with hygiene and make it more comfortable. With this routine, after 2 or 3 weeks of really using this and working with all the caregivers on each shift, Rose began using the toilet for the first time in 2 years. She would pull down her pants, she sat down on her bedside commode, and she would effectively void. She would allow herself to be cleaned and then pulled her pants back up, and she'd go back out of her room and into the main living area. She continued this activity for as long as the routine was continued by the staff. And I went in 6 months later, and the staff were just raving about how well that she was now communicating with the staff members and other members of the facility, other residents. She started doing other things away from hallucinating in the walls. So she would sweep the kitchen and she would help do dishes. So by communicating with her in a more effective way around this traumatic experience, it changed communication for her throughout the course of her entire day. So just to kind of wrap up, I just want to make sure that we review some of these points just to summarize. If you are working with someone, I want you to encourage participation in the activity. A lot of people can't just naturally start activity. Initiation can go away, so they may need a little bit of help. Use your nonverbals and your body language, so smiling faces, friendly voices. Pay attention to your own breathing, because people will become the mirror of you. However you act, they'll act. Use empathy. Remember to slow down. And always talk to your doctor if you have concerns. Paying attention to quality of life is really important. So if you are in a really tense moment, as long as the person that you're working with is safe, maybe stepping out for a minute and giving yourself a break. I have a couple other examples that we use sensation for communication, but I really want to leave some time for questions if we have any. This is one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou. She says, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I really believe that from a neurological standpoint to my soul. So I'm going to pass it back to Mike. I still don't think my camera is working.
Okay, well, thank you, Elizabeth. That's awesome. You might want to try turning your camera off and then back on again. Maybe that, kick the tires, and maybe that will work. But if not, that's okay. We can hear you just fine. Some references, as I mentioned, the presentation here, all the notes are at alzwebinars.org, and there's 2 pages of references here. Elizabeth has done quite a great job of documenting all of her source material. Some resources it's very important that you understand is that the Alzheimer's Association is here for you, whether the diagnosis is Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, or any other type of dementia. So we're here for you. And the easiest way to access our services is with a 24/7 nationwide helpline. And that's 800-272-3900. We always remind people to get out your cell phone here and program that into your contacts so that if you need it, 24 hours a day, you'll have it. Again, that's 272-3900, an 800 number. A lot of other people will like to do access the association and all of our resources through the website. They like to let their fingers do the walking on the keyboard, like I say. alz.org is the website, but there's 2 things that you can go to directly. The first is alzconnected.org, and that's an online support community for caregivers. And there's also a place for people with dementia. So alzconnected.org is a place you should really check out. It's a place you can go anonymously, and it's kind of like an online support group. alznavigator.org is really a great tool as well. And it does something where you can do for yourself, which you can do over the phone or in one of our local Alzheimer's Association offices, and that is have a navigation appointment. What alznavigator.org does is it asks you a bunch of questions and then assesses where you are in your Alzheimer's journey and what are some things that you're doing really well and what are some things that you haven't maybe really thought about. Some areas that will really help you if you put some focus here. And just as importantly, letting you know that as the journey progresses, there are some other things that you're going to want to prepare for before they are right upon you. So alznavigator.org really helps you get prepared for dealing with the Alzheimer's journey. You can do that, or if you'd rather do it over the phone, you can call our helpline, or you can come into one of our local offices after first setting up an appointment. and do a care navigation appointment with a person. As I mentioned, alz.org is the main website, but one of the things that people do either there or on our 800 number, our nationwide helpline, is to find resources. Now, the quickest way to do that, if you want to do it yourself, is go to communityresourcefinder.org or alz.org/CRF. And that is where you just put in your zip code and you say, I want to look at all the neurologists within 25 miles or 50 miles of my home. Or I want to look at all of the residential facilities or memory care units or in-home care providers or support groups. So communityresourcefinder.org is a valuable tool. If you'd rather not mess with the keyboard, just call our helpline, and that's totally fine. They will do that for you. Over the phone, they'll ask your zip code and what you're looking for, what type of resource, and they will get that to you. So again, that's communityresourcefinder.org. So I'm just going to go back here and leave that on the helpline so those of you who haven't written that down have a chance to do that. Now, with that, I'd like to thank Elizabeth for sharing her time and talent with us. And I've got a question here. Where can I find out more information about making us better at using sensory input to communicate with my mother? So, Elizabeth, is there a website or that would be a good resource for that?
That's a great question. And readily, I'm not sure. So I'm going to offer my email, and you can email me directly, and I can share lots of different resources that I have from a scientific standpoint as well as just from an experience standpoint. My email is my name, so it's Elizabeth, ELIZABETH .Rhodus, RHODUS @uky.edu. So if you could, shoot me an email. I would love to talk to you a little bit more about some specific communication strategies with your mother. And then, you and I can kind of explore what resources are out there from a sensory standpoint and communicating that way.
And if you didn't catch Elizabeth's email, when you go to alzwebinars.org and click by the recording of this webinar, you'll see the program notes. And that's what you see over here, the PowerPoint, right? In the second or third slide is her name and her contact information, and it's right there. So if you didn't catch that, it's in the program notes. Great. Okay, well, that is about all the time we have for today. Again, Elizabeth, thank you so much for providing this information. This is really, really beneficial to learn how to communicate more effectively, and it's not just our words. It's our environment and our use of the sensories. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right. Actually, I should say Dr. Rhodus. So
you can call me Elizabeth.
You've worked very hard for a PhD, and you need to be more pretentious. But thank you, Doctor. We really appreciate your help. I hope that all of you will go to alzwebinars.org and sign up for a future webinar. And until then, have a great day.